On one level, I'm not surprised by these findings. To hear them come from such an official source who's clearly looked into it deeply and talked to the people at the sharp end brings it home with some force, though.
It's absolutely remarkable, Colin, the influence of Islamist extremism within our prison system. Tackling that should be a government priority. And I am pleased to see Dr Rakib's recent announcements that essentially bringing forward reforms which will enable better usage of the separation centres that we have in place within the prison system. But there have been previous reports that have been published in the past which have talked about Sharia-style proceedings within the prison system, forced conversions, inmates being threatened with violence if they do not convert to Islam. So we almost have a parallel system of governance within our prison system, and that should be deeply worrying from a radicalisation perspective, because you may have prisoners who have committed non-terror related offences going into prison and being at risk of being radicalised, and then they may come out as radicalised individuals and then go on to carry terror related offences once they've been released.
Which absolutely underscores the importance of segregating, in the best possible sense, those people who have the ability to proselytise and brainwash and convince and persuade. I mean, when we talk about segregation, I mean, are we talking about people being put into solitary confinement? I mean, is that ultimately what we're talking about?
Well, we have three separation systems. We have three separation centres, you could say, within the prison system. One is in HMP Frankland in Durham. There's one near York, and there's also one at Woodhill in Milton Keynes. So it's not solitary confinement. It's rather the identification of key radicalising influences, which are very likely to include people who are convicted of terror-related offences, and isolating them from the mainstream prison population. I'd make the point that I'm probably more pro-rehabilitation than most. I think depending on one's severity of the crime, severity of crimes that they've committed, and the sentences that they're serving, I think that we should provide opportunity for prisoners to reform themselves, develop skills, and even be able to obtain qualifications while they are in prison, because that allows their reintegration into local communities once they're released.
Where they're very plausible, Rakib. Where their message is really plausible, because they've been on that spiritual and personal journey, and they can talk to young, impressionable, angry men and say, look, I felt like you did 15 years ago, look at me now.
This is precisely the point. I'm not referring to prisoners who've been convicted of terror-related offences. I'm referring to prisoners, and this is what I'm saying, is depending on the crime. But if you want to rehabilitate prisoners who are in prison for non-terror-related offences, and you want to set them on a more positive path, especially after they've been released, you have to ensure that those people are not, including individuals who may be vulnerable to radicalising influences, you have to ensure that they're separated from those extremist influences. And I think that's a very important point to make.
I wonder here also, Rakib, final thought really, to what extent this is a product and a problem born of a lack of almost intellectual self-confidence on the part of prison staff. They're worried about being called racist, they're worried about being called Islamophobic, they back off, they are ultimately letting somebody else run their prison territory, and they ought to be in charge of it. And to do that, they need to know a bit more about their subject, in a sense.
Well, I think that when it comes to these kind of radicalisation-related risks, we cannot afford to be paralysed by racial and religious sensitivities. I think all too often people who raise perfectly legitimate concerns regarding Islamist extremism, especially within the prison system, are accused of anti-Muslim prejudice, and that cannot continue. We have to be aware of the threat, and I do feel that when it comes to our prison system, we have to really be aware of the impact of radicalisation and the very serious risk that prisoners who may be in prison on non-terror-related offences, they can be radicalised, and then after being released, they may well carry terror-related forms of activity.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.